The dust swirled across the main street of Cedar Ridge like a vengeful spirit, carrying with it the whispers and judgments that had plagued Martha Henderson for the past 3 months. Her calloused hands gripped the worn leather handles of her carpetbag as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her dark blue dress already collecting the fine prairie dirt that seemed to coat everything in this God-forsaken corner of Kansas. The year was 1872, and Martha had traveled nearly 200 miles from St. Louis to escape the scandal that had destroyed her carefully constructed life as a schoolteacher. At 26 years old, Martha had been considered fortunate to have secured a teaching position at one of St. Louis's more respectable schools for young ladies. She had dedicated herself entirely to education, believing that knowledge and moral fortitude would be her salvation in a world that offered few opportunities for unmarried women. But one mistake, one moment of weakness with a charming railroad executive who had promised marriage and disappeared like morning mist, had left her with more than just a broken heart. The growing curve of her belly beneath her corset told a story that no amount of education or moral lectures could rewrite. The school board had dismissed her with barely concealed disgust once her condition became apparent. The headmistress, a stern woman named Mrs. Blackwood, had delivered the news with cold efficiency, explaining that Martha's moral failure made her unsuitable to shape young minds. The other teachers, women she had considered friends, had turned their backs on her with the swiftness of a prairie storm. Even the boarding house, where she had lived for 3 years, had asked her to find other accommodations, unwilling to house a woman of questionable virtue. Cedar Ridge was Martha's last hope, a small frontier town where she prayed her past might remain buried beneath the endless expanse of Kansas sky. She had answered an advertisement in the territorial newspaper for a schoolteacher, providing references from her previous position without mentioning the circumstances of her departure. The town council had accepted her credentials through correspondence, desperate for anyone with formal education willing to brave the harsh frontier life. As Martha surveyed the dusty main street with its collection of weathered wooden buildings, she noticed the curious stares of the townspeople. Cedar Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business within hours of their arrival. The general store, the saloon, the church, and perhaps 20 other structures comprised the entire settlement. Beyond the town limits stretched endless plains, dotted with homesteads carved from the unforgiving prairie. The schoolhouse sat at the eastern edge of town, a simple one-room building constructed from rough-hewn lumber that had already begun to gray under the relentless sun. Martha approached the building with a mixture of hope and trepidation, knowing that this humble structure represented her final chance at respectability. The interior was sparse but functional, with wooden desks arranged in neat rows and a large slate board mounted on the front wall. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows, and Martha could almost hear the voices of children who would soon fill this space with learning and laughter. For the first month, Martha managed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. The children of Cedar Ridge, ranging in age from 6 to 15, proved eager students hungry for knowledge. Their parents, mostly farmers and ranchers struggling to build lives on the frontier, valued education as a path to a better future for their offspring. Martha threw herself into teaching with renewed passion, preparing lessons by lamplight and walking the mile from her small rented room above the general store to the schoolhouse each morning before dawn. But as autumn gave way to winter, Martha's condition became increasingly difficult to conceal. The loose-fitting dresses and shawls that had provided camouflage in the early months could no longer hide the obvious signs of her pregnancy. Whispers began to circulate through Cedar Ridge like wildfire, spreading from the general store to the saloon to the church pews. The town council, led by the self-righteous banker Jeremiah Moss, called an emergency meeting to address what they termed the moral crisis threatening their community. The confrontation came on a bitter December morning when Martha arrived at the schoolhouse to find the door barred and Jeremiah Moss waiting with 3 other council members. Moss was a thin man with pale eyes and a perpetually stern expression, the kind of person who found sin lurking in every shadow and took particular pleasure in exposing the failings of others. He clutched a leather-bound Bible as if it were a weapon, his voice dripping with righteous indignation as he delivered the town's verdict. "Miss Henderson," he began, his words cutting through the morning air like shards of ice, "it has come to our attention that you have deceived this community about your moral character. A woman in your condition has no business teaching our children. We cannot allow someone of questionable virtue to corrupt the minds of our youth." Martha's face burned with shame and anger as she faced the tribunal of men who held her fate in their hands. She had known this moment would come, had prepared speeches defending her right to work and support herself, but the words died in her throat as she saw the cold judgment in their eyes. These men had already decided her guilt and pronounced sentence without offering her the chance to speak in her own defense. "I have given no cause for complaint in my teaching," Martha managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "The children have learned well under my instruction." "That may be so," Moss replied with a dismissive wave of his hand, "but a teacher must be above reproach in all aspects of life. Your presence here is a scandal that reflects poorly on our entire community. We have already contacted the Territorial Education Board to request a replacement. You will cease your duties immediately and vacate your lodgings by the end of the week." The humiliation was complete and public, witnessed by several townspeople who had gathered to observe the spectacle. Martha felt the weight of their stares as she turned away from the schoolhouse, her dreams of redemption crumbling like autumn leaves. She walked back toward town with as much dignity as she could maintain, her head held high despite the whispers that followed in her wake. It was then that she encountered Thomas McKinnon, a man whose own tragedy had marked him as an outsider in Cedar Ridge's tight-knit community. Thomas was 34 years old, a widower who had lost his wife Sarah to tuberculosis 2 years earlier, leaving him to raise their 7-year-old son Benjamin alone on a homestead 5 miles north of town. Thomas was a man of medium height with broad shoulders earned through years of hard labor, his brown hair already showing streaks of premature gray and his blue eyes holding the depth of someone who had known real loss. Unlike many of the other homesteaders, Thomas had come to Kansas with some education and a small inheritance that had allowed him to establish a more substantial farm than most. His wheat fields stretched across nearly 200 acres of prime prairie land, and his livestock included dairy cows, chickens, and several horses. Despite his relative prosperity, Thomas remained something of an enigma to the townspeople, keeping largely to himself, except for necessary trips to town for supplies and church services. Thomas had witnessed Martha's public humiliation from across the street as he loaded supplies into his wagon. Something about the quiet dignity with which she faced her tormentors struck a chord in his heart, reminding him of his own struggles against the judgment of those who whispered about his inability to find a new wife and provide Benjamin with a proper mother. He had heard the gossip about the schoolteacher's condition, but unlike others in the community, he found himself feeling sympathy rather than condemnation for her plight. As Martha walked past his wagon with her head held high, despite her obvious distress, Thomas made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He called out to her, his deep voice cutting through the morning air with unexpected gentleness. "Miss Henderson," he said, stepping down from his wagon to approach her, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Martha stopped and turned, her green eyes bright with unshed tears as she regarded this stranger who dared to speak to her after her public disgrace. She had noticed Thomas during her months in Cedar Ridge, a quiet man who brought his son to town on Saturdays for supplies and attended church services with solemn regularity. Benjamin McKinnon was one of her students, a bright and eager boy who soaked up knowledge like prairie soil absorbed precious rainwater. "Mr. McKinnon," Martha replied, her voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil raging in her heart. "I fear I am no longer in a position to discuss your son's education, as I have been relieved of my teaching duties." Thomas studied her face for a moment, seeing not the fallen woman that others perceived, but a person of strength and dignity, facing circumstances beyond her control. His own experience with loss and judgment had taught him to look beyond surface appearances to the character beneath. In Martha's quiet courage, he recognized a kindred spirit who understood what it meant to stand alone against the world. "I am not here to discuss Benjamin's schooling," Thomas said quietly, glancing around to ensure they could not be overheard. "I have a proposition that might benefit us both, though I understand it may seem presumptuous, given our brief acquaintance." Martha raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite her wariness. In her current situation, she could afford to hear any reasonable offer, no matter how unusual it might seem. The small amount of money she had saved from her teaching salary would not last long, and her options for employment were severely limited by both her condition and the scandal that now followed her like a shadow. "I am listening, Mr. McKinnon," she said simply. Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would sound shocking to conventional ears, but hoping that Martha would understand the practical wisdom behind his proposal. "I am in need of a wife, Miss Henderson, and you are in need of respectability and security. Benjamin needs a mother's care, and you will soon need support for your child. I propose a marriage of convenience, a partnership based on mutual benefit rather than romantic sentiment." The boldness of the proposal took Martha's breath away. In the space of a single morning, she had gone from disgraced schoolteacher to recipient of a marriage proposal from a man she barely knew. The practical part of her mind immediately began calculating the advantages of such an arrangement, while her heart wrestled with the implications of marrying without love. "You would marry me knowing my condition?" Martha asked, her voice barely audible. "The scandal would follow us both." Thomas nodded gravely. "I am already an object of speculation in this town, Miss Henderson. People wonder why I have not remarried, why I allow Benjamin to grow up without a mother's influence. Your presence in my home would answer their questions and provide my son with the education and refinement he needs. In return, I would offer you my name, my protection, and a home where you and your child would be safe from judgment." Oh, the conversation continued as Thomas outlined his terms with the precision of a business transaction. He would provide for Martha and her child as if they were his own blood, asking only that she manage his household and help raise Benjamin with the same dedication she had shown her students. There would be no expectations of romantic love or physical intimacy beyond what she was willing to offer. The marriage would be a practical arrangement between two adults who needed what the other could provide. Martha found herself both attracted to and appalled by the cold logic of the proposal. Part of her longed for a marriage based on love and mutual devotion, the kind of romantic partnership she had dreamed of as a young woman. But her circumstances had stripped away the luxury of such idealistic thinking, leaving her with the harsh reality that survival often required difficult compromises. "I need time to consider your offer, Mr. McKinnon," Martha said finally. "This is not a decision to be made lightly." Thomas nodded his understanding. "Take all the time you need, Miss Henderson. I will be in town again on Saturday if you wish to discuss the matter further. But I would ask that you not take too long with your decision. Winter is coming, and difficult choices become more difficult with each passing day." For the rest of that week, Martha wrestled with the decision that would determine the course of her future. She walked the streets of Cedar Ridge as a pariah, feeling the weight of disapproving stares and whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. The isolation was complete and suffocating, reminding her daily that her options were rapidly diminishing. She could attempt to reach another frontier town where her past was unknown, but travel in her condition would be dangerous and expensive. She could try to return east, but the scandal would follow her there as well, and her former connections had already made clear their rejection of her circumstances. When Saturday arrived, Martha made her decision with the same quiet determination that had carried her through the darkest moments of her life. She met Thomas at the general store as he loaded supplies for his weekly trip home, her resolve strengthened by another night of restless contemplation. "Mr. McKinnon," she said, approaching his wagon with measured steps, "I have considered your proposal carefully, and I accept your offer of marriage." Thomas nodded solemnly, as if they had just concluded a business agreement rather than arranged a union that would bind their lives together. "I am glad, Miss Henderson. I believe this arrangement will prove beneficial for both of us and our children." The wedding took place the following Tuesday at the parsonage, witnessed only by the minister and his wife. Reverend Patterson, a kindly man who had seen too much human struggle to judge others harshly, performed the ceremony with dignity despite the unusual circumstances. Martha wore her best dress, a simple grey wool garment that had served her well during her teaching days, while Thomas appeared in his Sunday suit, with his brown hair carefully combed and his boots polished to a shine. As they exchanged vows, Martha felt a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. The words they spoke were traditional, promising love, honor, and fidelity until death, but both understood that their marriage was built on different foundations. They were two damaged souls seeking shelter in each other's company, creating a family born of necessity rather than passion. After the brief ceremony, Thomas helped Martha into his wagon for the ride to what would now be her home. The McKinnon homestead stretched across a gentle rise in the prairie, anchored by a substantial two-story house built from carefully fitted logs and crowned with a stone chimney that spoke of permanence and stability. Outbuildings included a large barn, chicken coop, smokehouse, and root cellar, all arranged with the precision of a man who understood the importance of preparation and organization. Benjamin McKinnon waited on the front porch, a serious boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's delicate features. At 7 years old, he possessed the gravity of a child who had experienced loss too early, but Martha could see intelligence and curiosity burning in his gaze as he studied his new stepmother. He had been told of the marriage, but not the full circumstances surrounding it, understanding only that his father had chosen a wife who would help care for their home and family. "Benjamin," Thomas said as they approached the house, "this is Martha, who is now my wife and your new mother. I expect you to show her the same respect and obedience you would show me." The boy nodded solemnly, offering Martha a small bow that spoke of careful training in manners and courtesy. "Welcome to our home, ma'am," he said in a clear voice that reminded Martha of his eager participation in her classroom lessons. Martha knelt down to Benjamin's level, her hands gentle as she spoke to the child who would now be her son. "Thank you, Benjamin. I hope we can become good friends as well as family. Your father tells me you are an excellent student, and I look forward to continuing your education here at home." The first months of Martha's marriage to Thomas were marked by careful politeness and gradual adjustment to their new roles. Thomas proved to be a man of his word, providing for Martha's needs without complaint and treating her with the courtesy due a wife, regardless of the unconventional nature of their union. He converted a small room on the first floor into a private space for Martha, respecting her need for privacy during the final months of her pregnancy. Martha threw herself into managing the household with the same dedication she had once brought to teaching. She learned to milk cows, tend chickens, preserve food for winter, and manage the 1,000 details that kept a frontier farm running smoothly. Thomas had been managing alone since his first wife's death, and Martha could see the relief in his eyes as she gradually took over responsibilities that had been burdens for a single father. Benjamin proved to be a bright and eager student in their makeshift homeschool, absorbing lessons in arithmetic, reading, writing, and history with the same enthusiasm he had shown in the Cedar Ridge schoolhouse. Martha found joy in nurturing his young mind, seeing in his progress a validation of her belief in the power of education to transform lives. The boy gradually warmed to his new stepmother, beginning to seek her out for help with lessons and eventually for comfort when nightmares about his deceased mother disturbed his sleep. As winter deepened across the Kansas prairie, Martha's pregnancy progressed toward its conclusion. Thomas arranged for Mrs. Henley, an experienced midwife from a neighboring homestead, to attend the birth when the time came. He showed no awkwardness about Martha's condition, treating her pregnancy as a natural part of their family's expansion rather than a source of shame or embarrassment. The baby arrived on a bitter February night, when snow piled against the windows and the wind howled across the prairie like a living thing. Martha's labor was long and difficult, but Mrs. Henley's experienced hands guided the process with calm efficiency. Thomas waited downstairs with Benjamin, both males pacing the kitchen floor as they listened to the sounds from above that marked the arrival of new life. When Martha's daughter finally made her entrance into the world, she announced her presence with a lusty cry that seemed to fill the house with new energy. Mrs. Henley cleaned the baby and wrapped her in soft blankets before placing her in Martha's arms, declaring her to be a healthy and strong infant who would thrive under proper care. Thomas entered the room shortly after, his eyes soft as he looked upon the tiny person who would now be his daughter in all but blood. Benjamin followed behind him, wide-eyed with wonder, as he beheld his new sister for the first time. The baby had Martha's dark hair and delicate features, but her eyes held a brightness that seemed to reflect hope for the future. "What will you name her?" Thomas asked quietly, understanding that this choice belonged to Martha alone. Martha studied her daughter's face, thinking of all the dreams and hopes she wanted to invest in this new life. "Grace," she said finally. "Her name is Grace McKinnon." Thomas nodded his approval. "Grace is a fine name. She will be raised as my own daughter, with all the love and protection I would give to any child born to this family." The spring following Grace's birth marked a turning point in the McKinnon household. What had begun as a marriage of convenience gradually evolved into something deeper and more meaningful. Martha and Thomas developed a partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility, finding in each other qualities that complemented their own strengths and addressed their weaknesses. Thomas proved to be a gentle and patient man beneath his serious exterior, showing unexpected tenderness in his interactions with both children. He helped Martha establish a garden where she could grow vegetables and herbs, appreciating her knowledge of plants and their uses. He listened with genuine interest as she shared stories of her teaching days, recognizing the intelligence and capability that had made her such an effective educator. Martha discovered that Thomas possessed depths she had not initially perceived. He was well-read despite his practical nature, owning a collection of books that included works of literature, history, and philosophy, alongside practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry. Their evening conversations by the fireplace became a source of intellectual stimulation that Martha had not expected to find on the frontier. As Grace grew from infant to toddler, she brought laughter and joy to the household that had been marked by loss and solemnity. Benjamin proved to be a devoted big brother, helping care for his sister and taking pride in her accomplishments. The boy seemed to blossom under Martha's patient instruction and Thomas's steady guidance, developing confidence and curiosity that boded well for his future. The people of Cedar Ridge gradually accepted the McKinnon family's unconventional beginning. finding it harder to maintain their disapproval in the face of obvious domestic harmony. Thomas's standing in the community helped shield Martha from the worst gossip, and her quiet dignity in the face of past judgment gradually earned a grudging respect from those who had previously condemned her. One evening in late spring, as Martha sat on the front porch, watching Grace take her first tentative steps while Benjamin encouraged her with gentle words, Thomas approached and settled beside her on the wooden steps. The sunset painted the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, and the air carried the sweet scent of new grass and blooming wildflowers. "I have been thinking," Thomas said quietly, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the land met the sky in an unbroken line, "about our arrangement and how it has changed over these months." Martha felt her heart skip a beat, wondering if Thomas regretted their bargain now that the immediate needs that had brought them together had been addressed. "What thoughts trouble you, husband?" she asked, using the title that had become natural despite their unconventional beginning. Thomas turned to look at her, his blue eyes warm in the fading light. "No troubles, Martha, only gratitude for what we have built together. When I first proposed our marriage, I thought only of practical benefits and mutual convenience. But I have come to realize that what we have created is something more valuable than I dared hope." Martha waited for him to continue, her own heart beginning to open to possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider during the early months of their marriage. "I find myself caring for you not just as the mother of my children or the manager of my household, but as the woman who has brought light back into this home," Thomas continued. "If you are willing, I would like our marriage to become more than the business arrangement we once agreed upon." The honesty in his voice touched Martha deeply, echoing the feelings that had been growing in her own heart as she watched Thomas prove himself to be a man of integrity and kindness. What had begun as a desperate bargain had evolved into genuine affection and respect, creating the foundation for something that might truly be called love. "I am willing, Thomas," Martha replied softly. "You have shown me kindness when the world offered only judgment, and you have given me a home where Grace and I are wanted and valued. If you wish our marriage to be more than convenience, then I welcome that change with all my heart." That night marked the true beginning of their marriage, as two people who had found each other in desperation discovered that they had created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. The union that had begun with Thomas's words, "Now you are my wife," to a humiliated teacher, became a partnership built on love, respect, and shared commitment to the family they had created together. Years passed, and the McKinnon homestead prospered under their joint stewardship. Martha bore Thomas 2 more children, a son they named Samuel and a daughter called Hope, expanding their family and filling their home with the sounds of childhood laughter and learning. Benjamin grew into a young man of character and intelligence, eventually attending college in the East before returning to help manage the family farm. Grace developed into a spirited young woman who inherited her mother's love of learning and her adoptive father's practical wisdom. The story of Thomas and Martha McKinnon became part of Cedar Ridge folklore, told and retold as an example of how love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings. Their marriage had started as a transaction born of necessity, but it evolved into a partnership that demonstrated the power of second chances and the possibility of redemption even in the face of society's harshest judgments. Martha often reflected on the journey that had brought her from the humiliation of that December morning to the contentment of her life as Mrs. McKinnon. The scandal that had once threatened to destroy her had instead led her to a man who valued her worth beyond society's narrow definitions of propriety. The child she had borne in shame became the daughter of a respected family, growing up surrounded by love and acceptance rather than judgment and condemnation. Thomas, for his part, found in Martha not just a wife and mother for his children, but a true partner who shared his dreams and helped him build something lasting on the Kansas prairie. The lonely widower, who had proposed marriage to a disgraced teacher, discovered that love could indeed grow from the most practical beginnings, creating bonds stronger than those forged in passion alone. Their story stood as a testament to the idea that redemption was possible for anyone willing to look beyond surface appearances and social conventions to find the person beneath. In a harsh land where survival often depended on practical decisions rather than romantic ideals, Thomas and Martha McKinnon had proven that marriages built on mutual respect and shared purpose could grow into love stories worthy of any frontier legend. The words, "Now you are my wife," had been spoken in desperation to a woman humiliated by circumstances beyond her control. But they became the foundation of a love story that demonstrated the transformative power of second chances and the possibility that sometimes the most practical decisions could lead to the most profound happiness. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, redemption, and the indomitable human spirit that shaped the American frontier. Leave a comment below and tell us about a time when you or someone you know found opportunity in the midst of adversity, or share what other Old West stories you'd like to hear next. Your engagement helps us bring these forgotten tales of the frontier to life, so don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a new story from our collection of Old West legends.